Oscar Pistorius cleared of murder, but his fate still hangs in the balance. The Olympic star faces an anxious night. The judge will deliver her verdict on manslaughter charges tomorrow.
In the circumstances, it is clear that his conduct was negligent.
Also tonight, Salmond predicts victory, but big retailers warn of price rises in an independent Scotland.
Remembering 9/11 as Obama claims support for his new war on Islamist terrorists.
And could this be your next work colleague? Meet Bob, the new generation of intelligent robot.
This is ITV News at 6:30 with Mark Austin and Charlene White.
Good evening. Oscar Pistorius wept in court today as a judge cleared him of murdering his girlfriend, but he faces a troubled night. He must wait until tomorrow to know his fate on manslaughter charges.
The judge said there was no evidence to show the former Olympic athlete had either planned or intended to kill Reeva Steenkamp, but he had been negligent, said the judge, and a reasonable person would not have fired through the locked toilet door. Our Africa correspondent Rohit Kachu reports on a dramatic day in court.
Tomorrow's headline from here might still be that Oscar Pistorius is guilty.
Mr. Pistorius, you may remain seated. I'll tell you when to rise.
But tonight, it is that he is not.
The accused was charged with the murder of Reeva Steenkamp.
Evidence of murder that had taken months to build was dismantled in moments, and this was the consequence.
The accused is charged with premeditated murder. In respect of this charge, the evidence is purely circumstantial.
She agreed that there was no planning, no plot to kill his girlfriend. And in court, the emotion now was of a man who'd learned that he is not guilty of the gravest charges against him. But the judge finished by warning that she'll reveal tomorrow whether he's guilty of manslaughter.
He failed to take any step to avoid the resultant death. I am of the view that the accused acted too hastily and used excessive force. In the circumstances, it is clear that his conduct was negligent. I will have to stop here. We'll proceed tomorrow morning at 9:30.
Earlier, his closest supporters arrived at court. Like his brother, almost killed in a car crash last month. He told me that despite his injuries, he had to be here.
It's a great honour to be here to support my brother, as it would be a great honour for each one of our siblings to support one another in any circumstance.
Oscar Pistorius will hear his fate tomorrow. He could still be given a severe sentence for killing Reeva Steenkamp, or for the 3 gun-related charges that he faces. Oscar Pistorius might still be jailed. He'll face more serious charges tomorrow, but today the judge ruled that he is not a murderer. Having heard that ruling, he left court to hear the sound of cheering fans. But he'll return tomorrow, when more of those remaining questions at the heart of this case will be answered.
So, Rohit, a day of real drama. What is likely to happen tomorrow, do you think?
Prison sentence to a suspended sentence, or of course to complete acquittal, though any sentence would actually be decided at a later date. Oscar Pistorius' lawyers might consider today to be something of a victory. Remember, the judge had to decide between 2 differing accounts. His own, that he was motivated by fear of an intruder. The prosecution's, that he was motivated by rage after an argument with his girlfriend. Well, today the judge essentially backed his account, though tomorrow she will decide whether that constitutes culpable homicide.
All right, Rohit, thank you very much indeed, and we apologise for the lack of sound at the beginning of that interview.
Salmond claimed today that Scotland stood on the cusp of history, but he also faced mounting criticism over his economic plans. Major retailers Asda and John Lewis warned of higher prices for customers, and big financial institutions RBS and Lloyds joined Standard Life in saying they would move part of their operations south.
Mr Salmond accused the Treasury of leaking financial information and his opponents of scaremongering. Martin Geisler reports now on the battle over whether independence would come at a price.
With just a week till Scotland votes, this is perhaps the biggest test the Yes campaign has faced. Key players in the finance sector are guarding against the prospect of independence, and shoppers have been warned they'd pay more at the tills. Salmond was on the offensive today, addressing the messenger before the message. He's furious details of all this were leaked by the Treasury.
The Treasury officials or ministers are not allowed to brief market-sensitive information. Market-sensitive information, and it's a basic rule, cannot be released prior to the market announcement at 7 o'clock this morning. The Royal Bank of Scotland share price changed overnight. This is a matter of extraordinary gravity.
The fear for these firms is that they find themselves based in an independent Scotland that doesn't have a currency union with the rest of the UK, sharing the pound, sharing the risks. If that was to happen, they'd lose the support of the Bank of England. It couldn't prop them up if there was another financial crisis. So what they're making plans to do now is move their registered headquarters, the address on the letterhead or the brass plaque on the door, south of the border. RBS staff were given an assurance today there are no plans to move jobs. But all this is grist to the mill for the No campaign. They drafted in reinforcements this afternoon. 100 Labour MPs brought up from England and Wales by train to help in the final push. They walked straight into a noisy but peaceful face-off on the streets of Glasgow at an anti-independence rally and a strong message from their party leader.
I think what you're seeing day by day in this campaign is a sense of the risks of voting yes. The risks to jobs, the risks to the economy, the risks to our public services. And I know that people across Scotland will be listening to what the business community, the trade unions and others are saying about those risks.
Today's warnings from John Lewis and Asda may well resonate in homes across Scotland. Both retailers have said the higher costs of operating here would push up prices on the shelves.
It's just a big bluff. I mean, why should they have to put their prices up? It's nonsense.
I think if we did go for independence, I think it'll affect all over the board.
It's hard to understand who to believe in both sides of the party. It's a tricky one.
It's thought more than 500,000 Scots could leave the final decision on how to vote until they walk into the polling booth a week today. This may well become a battle of the heart against the wallet. Martin Geisler, ITV News, Edinburgh.
Well, our business editor Joel Hills joins us now. And Joel, the economy has become a big issue in this campaign. There's claim and there's counterclaim. But what's your analysis of it?
Well, let's start with the John Lewis warning, shall we, that a yes vote would have economic consequences, that it would likely raise the cost of doing business in Scotland. And what the John Lewis partnership is saying is in Waitrose, in John Lewis, they probably look to pass those costs on to Scottish consumers. But we've heard something similar from the likes of Next and Kingfisher, which owns B&Q, in recent weeks. Asda today said it too would have to separate its Scottish businesses. All those nice efficiencies would disappear and prices would likely rise. It's not really that cut and simple. Other retailers take a very different view. I've been talking to Aldi, I've been talking to Morrison's home retail group, own Argos. They say it's far too soon to say with any certainty what's going to happen next. The cost of doing business in Scotland may actually fall in some of their views. In terms of the banks that are moving, Clydesdale, Tesco, we've heard RBS and Lloyds, of course, and TSB, they're relocating. That's not going to affect jobs, we're told. It's not going to affect the tax they pay. It's going to mean the banks are supported, that people have their deposits protected. The only anxiety here that remains is that Scotland ends up with its own currency, that people are paid in one currency and have mortgages in another. That could cause all sorts of problems, but we're not there yet.
All right, Joel, thanks very much.
Well, tonight, doubts have also been cast on claims by the Yes campaign about NHS spending. The director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies said it was hard to see how independence would allow Scotland to spend more on health. Our political correspondent, Romilly Weeks, is in Edinburgh. Romilly, how significant do you think this is?
Well, the NHS has been one of the biggest flashpoints of the entire independence campaign. Alex Salmond has used the slogan "Vote Yes" to save the NHS, saying that it's the only way to save it from creeping privatisation. That's the biggest deception of the whole campaign, according to Better Together, who point out that the Scottish Government already run the NHS in Scotland. So a crucial issue and a potentially crucial intervention by the IFS. They are an independent body, and this is their judgment on the NHS issue.
If Scotland goes independent, it will likely face a bigger budget deficit than the UK as a whole. That means it will have to borrow more from the markets. Now, in order to address that, it would need to make either bigger cuts in spending or bigger tax rises. So that could make protecting the NHS more challenging in an independent Scotland.
Well, the SNP have responded today in rather broad terms by saying, with independence, we can end austerity and use the vast wealth of Scotland to support our public services like the NHS. The NHS has been a powerful tool for the SNP. It might be rather harder for them to use it as a trump card now.
All right, Romilly, thank you.
America says it's heading a coalition of countries to combat the threat from Islamic State militants in Syria and Iraq. It came after President Obama's pledge that he's prepared to launch airstrikes against the group's Syrian stronghold.
As our Washington correspondent Robert Moore reports, he chose the anniversary of 9/11 to insist there would be no safe haven for terrorists who attack America.
This president always hoped that his enduring legacy would be as the leader who ended two of America's longest conflicts. But today, as he paused on the anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, everything has changed once more. He is taking his country not out of, but into two intractable civil wars. Overnight, the president insisted he would now strike the extremists, irrespective of geography and borders.
We will hunt down terrorists who threaten our country wherever they are. That means I will not hesitate to take action against ISIL in Syria as well as Iraq. This is a core principle of my presidency. If you threaten America, you will find no safe haven.
But to a war-weary country, he made this promise.
I want the American people to understand how this effort will be different from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It will not involve American combat troops fighting on foreign soil.
The strategy of taking out terrorists. Even that is a tough sell to ordinary Americans who see just a faraway crisis.
We've lost thousands of soldiers and countless, civilians. I think we just want to be done with it, close that chapter in American history.
I think it's a regional problem and regional actors should take care of it.
And so now we know the strategy. A significantly expanded air war and hoping that local moderate forces on the ground fill the security vacuum. 10 Arab countries are promising to join the fight against the Islamic State, though the Syrian regime warns any attack without coordinating with Damascus will be regarded as an act of aggression. At the Pentagon, now busy planning for the expanding war, there was also time to remember the events of exactly 13 years ago.
You are our hero, and you are not forgotten.
This day is a solemn one across America, nowhere more so than in New York, and especially today as the country braces for another long and uncertain military operation. Degrading and destroying the Islamic State is likely to take not months, but years. It means President Obama is almost certain to miss his single most cherished goal of leaving office, having extracted America from the quagmire of the Middle East. Robert Moore, ITV News, Washington.
Well, Downing Street tonight confirmed that Britain could join American airstrikes against Islamic State in Syria. It was forced to step in after the Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, appeared to say Britain would not take part. Well, our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Shipp, is in Westminster for us. Chris, what caused this confusion?
Well, Charlene, the Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond was asked quite clearly this afternoon if Britain would support airstrikes against Islamic State fighters if those fighters were in Syria. Now, you think he answered quite clearly. He said Britain will not be taking part in any airstrikes in Syria. I can be very clear about that. Now, that immediately raised eyebrows in Washington, where President Obama's strategy was barely 12 hours old. And as you've just heard, does involve airstrikes in both Iraq and Syria. Downing Street were then forced to rush out a statement saying no, he wasn't referring to Syria, but he was referring to the Syrian regime. There will not be any airstrikes against President Assad in Syria. And sources are insisting this was the Foreign Secretary misspeaking, if you like, rather than revealing the innermost thoughts at the top of the British government.
Thank you, Chris.
Still to come on the programme.
Look at all the hate you've got towards girls! All the hate!
Facing the wrath of Rotherham, but the town's police commissioner refuses to resign.
And the next generation of robots getting a handle on human behaviour. We'll find out whose job he's after the break.
Not mine, I hope.
Welcome back. An inquest heard today how a nurse blamed herself over a prank call about the Duchess of Cambridge. The nurse, Jacinta Saldana, was found dead after hospital staff were tricked into talking to two Australian radio DJs about the Duchess's pregnancy. Sejal Karia was there.
It has been a long road to this inquest, but today, after almost 2 years of delays, Jacinta Saldana's family arrived at court to gain the closure they say they need. Her husband, Benedict Barbosa, seen here third from the right, was accompanied by his two children, Leisha and Janelle, on the left. Also present was one of the Australian DJs who made the prank call to the hospital where the Duchess of Cambridge was a patient that night. Mel Gregg said she was keeping a promise to the family that she would attend. It was after answering the call made by her and her colleague that Ms. Saldana was found dead. The court heard today the hospital received the call in the early hours of a December morning back in 2012. Ms. Saldana, the night sister, then put it through to the Duchess's ward. A colleague of Jacinta Saldana's, a nurse whose identity was withheld by the court, then described the moment that she took the phone call. She said she believed she would be talking to the Queen and even addressed the caller as Mom. She said she only started feeling alarmed when the caller made a reference to walking the corgis. She said it's at that point that she believed that the call was a hoax. Later, she said she received an email from Ms. Saldana, which she read to the court. In it, she wrote, "It's all my fault. I feel very bad about this to get you involved. If there was anything I could do to mend this, I would do it." Her husband listened intently to today's evidence. Earlier, he'd paid this tribute to her, saying she was his beloved wife and a caring wife, loving mother, and undoubtedly one of the best nurses. The coroner is due to deliver her verdict tomorrow. Sejal Karia, ITV News at the Royal Courts of Justice.
It's emerged that South Yorkshire's Police and Crime Commissioner Sean Wright is to be investigated by the Independent Police Complaints Commission over his handling of the Rotherham child abuse scandal. Today, Mr Wright was barracked by angry families at a highly charged public meeting. Our reporter Damon Green is in Rotherham tonight. Damon, what happened?
Well, everyone up to the Prime Minister has called for Sean Wright to step down, and still he hasn't. Today it was the turn of members of the public who attended a meeting of the police and crime panel here at Rotherham Town Hall. One of them was a sister of a woman who was groomed and murdered 4 years ago, and this is what she had to say to Mr Wright when she had the floor.
You can't even look me in the face! Can you? Look! Look at all the hate you've got towards girls! All the hate! Just think we've got to live with that with our families! You've done nothing to support us, nothing to support! I've had to go to my own! And that was last week! I've had to live with this for 12 bloody years! And what have you done? You've still got your job, you should stand down! Stand down!
Well, as you say, the Independent Police Complaints Commission is now looking at 2 complaints referred to them. It's looking at those complaints. If it decides there is ground for an investigation, that investigation will take place. And if that investigation finds that there is a basis for a criminal charge against Mr Wright, the Crown Prosecution Service can then act. A lot of ifs there, but it's the beginning of a process which could see Sean Wright stripped of his job, even if he doesn't want to go.
All right, Damon, thank you very much indeed.
A 28-year-old woman has been arrested over the murder of a mother of 5, stabbed to death in a paddock in the New Forest. Penelope Davis was killed last Tuesday as she tended to her horses in Hampshire. The arrested woman is being held on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder.
Finally, Boris is big and smart and he can pick up things he's never seen before. That's quite a major advance for a robot, according to the scientists who unveiled him today.
Another, called Bob, has even managed to shift a security guard. Well, more from our science correspondent, Alok Jha.
Meet your new security guard. Bob is part of a £7 million project at the University of Birmingham to build robots that can act intelligently and independently in the real world. He can map the space around him in 3 dimensions and take account of how it changes every millisecond.
He can see people with his cameras, he can see doors, he can see walls with his laser. So he drives around checking what's around him and whether that's allowed to be there or not, and he learns over time how things behave and whether things are normal or abnormal in his environment.
The question is Bob any better than a human security guard?
So humans have some capabilities, robots have others. So robots are able to measure at kind of millimetre accuracy and see things at kind of regular intervals, which humans don't. I think he's heading off.
He's got work to do.
He's got work to do. He's got his to-do list.
But there are some things that people do without thinking, which robots find very difficult, like picking things up. This is Boris. He can actually see what's placed in front of him, work out how to pick it up, and move it from A to B. And, unlike other robots, he can do all of this with things he's never seen before.
You will be able to assemble objects in factories, but rather than as with conventional robots where they have to know exactly where the car door is in order to pick it up, you could put the parts on the table and then get the robot to assemble the object.
These skills will also be valuable in places hazardous to humans, inside damaged nuclear power plants, for example.
That robot's going to have to cope with a degree of variability that a person could cope with. So, for example, closing valves of different shapes and sizes, opening door handles, things that we find really easy, but robots, if they're going to work in our world, they find really hard.
That's all far in the future, but it all starts with a grasp. Alok Jha, ITV News.
Later on News at 10. Movie director Sam Taylor-Johnson talks to us about the most talked about film in production, 50 Shades of Grey.
It's taken me into a realm which I've never been in, and that's why I like doing things like that.
Post-Watershed, that. Join me and Mary Nightingale later, but for now, bye-bye.
Goodbye.